Midweek Politics with Dave Pakman on midweekpolitics.com.
Welcome back to Midweek Politics. I'm David Pakman, and in studio with us is David Chura, author of I Don't Wish Nobody to Have a Life Like Mine, Tales of Kids in Adult Lockup. Tell us how you first got involved with the prison system and the criminal justice work that you did.
Well, I've been teaching working with kids in high school age for about 13 years in an alternative school, which was sort of community-based. And so these were kids who were having problems in school, but they still needed to be in an alternative sort of setting. And I did that for quite a while. And then there was beginning to be a change in both education policy and financing, and our staff started to being cut. And I really began to feel like I couldn't do what I needed to do working with kids, given the sort of lack of staff and the lack of resources. And I had known some teachers who were working in a jail, Westchester County Jail, which is a part of a suburb of metropolitan New York. And they were in this program, and they felt it was pretty satisfying. It was pretty demanding, but that yet they felt that they were doing some good things. So I decided that I would start to work with kids who were incarcerated in an adult jail.
And what are the most common reasons? How does a kid end up in an adult jail?
Well, one of the reasons why they get there is because they have some kind of record that's led them there. And when I say record, I mean that, we're talking about kids who could have been in all kinds of foster care and group homes, so they had not the resources to stay out of trouble. And then once they got in trouble, it sort of accelerated for them in terms of the seriousness of what they did. But I did work with kids in jail who were there just because they trespassed, or they had been using drugs, or were doing sort of low kind of scale drug sales. And in some ways they fell victim to that whole sort of tough on crime, tough on locking people up for what they did. And therefore, kids who you really probably wouldn't have expected to find in an adult jail were there serving time.
And we're talking as young as 17, even younger?
Actually, I worked with some very young 15-year-olds.
Wow.
So they were pretty young.
And in most of these cases, or I guess it's hard to speak overall, but in many of these cases, would their term be long enough that they would be adults by the time they get out? Or sometimes they would serve their entire term as kids and be out?
Yeah, mostly they serve their time as kids. A county jail is the longest sentence usually is 8 months. But I did work with young people who were sort of being held there, and then we're going to be transported to a state prison. So we're talking about kids who might be sentenced to 5 to 6 years.
And it's actually interesting that we have you in today. Just over the weekend, I was on the West Coast, and I took a tour of Alcatraz, and it was fascinating. I've always been interested in prisons, and the thing that stood out to me, well, a lot of things stood out. It was just an incredible tour overall. The size of the cells was just unbelievable, and we were told there that it's actually not that uncommon to see cells that small. That's a unique situation because you have limited space, you're on an island, but that the conditions are not too dissimilar in prisons that are open today. In some of your experience, what have conditions been like where both adults and kids are being held?
Well, actually, I think that probably the size of the cells that you saw were the size of the cells of that inmates were incarcerated in the jail that I was in, because there's actually a federal limit of exactly what exactly can be the size and what can be in a cell. One of the things that struck me the most was that the jail, it was very dirty, it was loud, it was overcrowded, and in some cases, which I don't think a lot of people know, is that these young people and adults were being housed there often because they couldn't make bail, they were waiting for trial, so that they were supposedly innocent, but they were being held in very primitive, very aggressive sort of environment, and they had yet to go to trial. And the conditions were the same if you were serving your 8-month term or your 2-year term.
Midweek Politics is brought to you in part by Jackson & Connor, classically modern men's apparel in Northampton, Massachusetts on the second floor of Thorne's Marketplace, and by DIF Design, specializing in custom business websites at difdesign.com. To find out more about underwriting Midweek Politics, visit midweekpolitics.com.